promise I'd stop, even though I hadn't really started. But the more I resisted, the more specific the desire became. It wasn't random anymore. I didn't just want to look.
I wanted to know how it would feel on me.
I wanted to know why that image in my mind seemed more peaceful than the face I wore every day. The first time I actually tried anything, it was rushed, clumsy, and unforgettable. I was alone for less than 20 minutes. That was all the time I had. I remember checking the main door twice, then 3 times, then listening for sounds that weren't there. My hands felt numb. I found one item, then another, and every second felt stolen. I didn't know about sizing, balance, shapes, fabrics, or what worked together. I knew nothing. But the second I put those pieces on, even badly, even awkwardly, even with fear crawling all over my skin, I looked in the mirror and something hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the table. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't transformation. It was recognition. I saw a version of myself that wasn't complete yet, wasn't polished yet, maybe wasn't even coherent yet, but it was honest. And honest can be overwhelming when you've been surviving on denial. That first mirror moment didn't make me brave. It made me more secretive. Because now I knew. Before, I could pretend I was imagining things. After that, I couldn't. So, I became careful in ways that only someone with a hidden life understands. I learned which floorboards creaked. I learned how long it took certain people to come home. I learned the sound of keys outside the door and the speed at which panic can erase a face. I became an expert at disappearing evidence. Makeup wipes. Hangers back in place. Bags folded flat. Phone brightness low. Search history cleaned. Expressions neutral. It was exhausting. And the strange thing was, the moments that made me happiest were the same moments that trained me to live in fear. There was one night I nearly got caught so badly that I stopped for weeks afterward. I had done more than usual that evening. A better outfit. A little eyeliner. Lip color I had no business trying with such unsteady hands. I actually felt beautiful for maybe 5 full minutes, which at that time was an impossible luxury. Then I heard a voice outside. Not far away. Right outside. I froze. Every disaster hit my mind at once. The questions. The disgust. The laughter. The disappointment. I ripped everything off so fast, I nearly tore the fabric. I scrubbed at my face until my skin burned. By the time the door opened, I was sitting there pretending to check my phone, breathing like I'd run a race. The person barely looked at me. They asked one casual question and left. That was it. Nothing happened. But after the door closed, I sat there shaking because I realized my biggest fear didn't need to fully happen to control me. Even the possibility was enough. I told myself I would stop. I meant it too. For maybe 3 days. Maybe 5. But once you've seen yourself in a way that feels true, returning to numbness is harder than resisting curiosity ever was. The problem wasn't desire anymore. The problem was loneliness. I had no one to ask anything. No one. I couldn't ask what shade to use. I couldn't ask how to hide beard shadow. I couldn't ask why some days I felt powerful and other days I felt ashamed. So, I made mistakes in silence. I bought the wrong sizes. I chose the wrong fabrics. I wore things that looked good in my imagination and ridiculous in real life. I expected one outfit to heal years of confusion. It doesn't work like that. Crossdressing, at least for me, became part self-expression, part craft, part therapy, part confrontation. I had to learn not just how to dress, but how to be patient with the version of me that was learning in private. One of the first lessons I wish someone had told me earlier is that confidence never comes from forcing yourself into an image that doesn't fit. It comes from understanding your body and building around it. I used to think the prettier the item looked by itself, the better I would look in it. Completely wrong. Some of my worst nights came from chasing fantasy instead of fit. The moment I started paying attention to cuts, proportions, fabrics, and what actually made me feel comfortable, everything changed. A slightly looser top. A skirt that sat right. Layers that soften my shape instead of fighting it. Colors that worked with my skin instead of against it. Even posture mattered more than I expected. I learned that how I carried myself changed the entire look. Not fake femininity. Not performance for strangers. Just softness where I had always been tense. Grace where I had always been guarded. That taught me something bigger than fashion. Half of what I was searching for was not in the clothes. It was in the permission to move differently. The next turning point came when secrecy stopped being enough, and I started wanting continuity. Private moments were powerful, but they vanished too fast. I would spend an hour building myself up and 5 minutes destroying the evidence. That cycle became painful. I wanted proof I existed between those moments. So, I did something that scared me almost as much as being caught. I took a photo. Just one. Terrible lighting. Awkward angle. Nervous smile. But when I looked at it later, long after I had changed back, I felt something close to relief. I hadn't imagined her. She was real. Maybe incomplete, maybe hidden, maybe known only to me, but real. That single photo became many. Not because I wanted attention, because I needed continuity. I needed to see that this side of me wasn't a ghost appearing and vanishing at random. She had patterns. She had moods. She had growth. That growth was messy. Sometimes I felt euphoric. Sometimes I felt guilty for no reason other than years of fear living in my bones. Sometimes I looked at myself and thought, yes, this is me. Other times I saw every flaw at once and spiraled. If you've ever done that, if you've ever had one magical night followed by 3 awful ones where nothing looks right, and your makeup fights you and your confidence disappears, I need you to know something I learned the hard way. Inconsistency does not mean you are fake. It means you are human. There is a huge difference. I spent too long treating bad nights like proof that I should quit. They weren't proof of failure. They were proof that I was learning. Eventually, I found my way into online spaces where people like me existed openly, casually, beautifully. That changed me in ways I didn't expect. Not because I suddenly copied everything I saw, but because I realized my feelings weren't some isolated glitch. There were people with different stories, different bodies, different reasons, different identities, and yet there was something deeply familiar in all of them. The relief of expression after years of hiding. Some were glamorous. Some were playful. Some were quiet. Some were bold. Some wanted transformation. Some wanted comfort. Some treated it like art. Some treated it like survival. Watching them taught me another important lesson. There is no single correct way to cross-dress. The moment you start measuring your truth against someone else's aesthetic, you lose touch with your own. At first I stayed invisible in those spaces. I watched. I learned. I saved tips. How to blend more naturally. How to build an outfit from one strong piece instead of too many conflicting ones. How to choose shoes you can actually walk in. How to remove makeup gently instead of punishing your skin. How to buy smarter so you don't end up with a wardrobe full of panic purchases. And maybe the most valuable lesson of all, how to protect yourself emotionally. Because for people like us, expression can become addictive in a dangerous way if every session is built on desperation. I had to learn to slow down, to plan instead of binge, to dress because I wanted to, not because I needed one perfect night to save me from all my fear. The nights got better after that.
Softer.
Less frantic. More real. Then came the day I crossed a line I had promised myself I would never cross. I went outside. It sounds small when I say it now, but it felt enormous then. I prepared for days. Maybe weeks if I'm honest. I changed my mind repeatedly. I planned a safe place. A quiet area. Low risk. Neutral timing. I kept telling myself I could still back out. My heart was racing before I even got dressed. Every little detail suddenly mattered. Was the outfit too much? Too plain? Was my face blended enough? Could people tell immediately? Was my walk wrong? My hands? My voice if anyone spoke to me? Fear multiplies when you leave the mirror and enter the world. Inside, you can still believe you control the angle. Outside, the angle belongs to everyone. The first few steps felt unreal. My body didn't know whether to tremble or float. I kept waiting for alarms that never came. I expected every car to slow down, every person to stare, every passing second to expose me. But what surprised me most was how indifferent the world could be. People were living their own lives. A glance here, a passing look there. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. And in that ordinary quiet, a truth hit me harder than any fantasy ever had. I had built a prison with walls far taller than reality. That doesn't mean the world is always safe. It isn't. And I would never tell anyone to take risks without thinking carefully about their environment. But in that moment, I understood that fear had been narrating my life like a liar who sounded convincing only because I never questioned him out loud. That first outing was not perfect. I was stiff, overaware. My smile looked borrowed. I rushed everything. But once I made it back home, I couldn't stop replaying it. Not because I had passed some test. Not because strangers approved of me. Because I had done something I once believed was impossible. And after that, the private room was never the same. A door had opened in my mind, and even when I stayed inside, I knew the outside existed. I became bolder, but not wiser right away. Boldness without preparation is just panic in expensive clothes. I learned that the hard way during another outing when I picked the wrong place, the wrong time, and the wrong level of confidence for the situation. I was walking through a busier area than usual, trying to act natural while internally falling apart, when I saw someone I recognized. Not a close friend. Not family. Worse, in a way. One of those familiar faces from ordinary life, someone from that half-circle of people who know your name well enough to reshape your reality if they choose to. The second our eyes met, I felt the air leave my body. I turned too fast, which only made me more noticeable. I walked away trying not to run, hearing my own heels, my own breath, my own thoughts screaming that it was over. For 2 days, I heard nothing. Those were the longest 2 days of my life. Every notification on my phone felt like a threat. Every knock at the door made my stomach drop. I imagined rumors spreading, jokes being made, screenshots, whispers, humiliation. None of it happened. Either they didn't recognize me, or they chose silence. I never found out. But that scare taught me something crucial. Secrecy can't be your only plan. You also need emotional readiness for what happens if secrecy fails. Until then, I had trained only for hiding, never for surviving exposure. That changed after that day. I started asking myself harder questions. If someone found out, what would I say? If someone mocked me, how would I recover? If someone I cared about asked directly, would I lie, freeze, or tell the truth? It was frightening, but it was the beginning of real strength. Not long after that, the universe stopped waiting for me to prepare. It happened on a completely ordinary evening, which is somehow how life always chooses its most dramatic moments. I had gotten too comfortable. Not careless exactly, but comfortable enough to underestimate. Timing. I was dressed, fully this time, and unlike in the early days, I wasn't rushing. I was actually enjoying myself. Music low, light soft, makeup better than usual. I remember thinking I finally looked like the version of me I'd been trying to reach. Then I heard the door. Not the outer door. My door. I didn't even have time to move. It opened halfway, and there she was. My cousin. Close enough to matter. Not close enough for me to know instantly what she would do. We stared at each other in a silence, so sharp it felt physical. Her expression changed 3 times in 1 second. Shock. Confusion. Recognition. Mine probably changed even more. I was ready for laughter, disgust, interrogation, anything. Instead, she slowly closed the door behind her, still inside the room, and said the softest, most dangerous words anyone had ever said to me. How long? I couldn't answer at first. My throat was closed. My body wanted to disappear. I felt small in a way I hadn't felt since childhood. When I finally spoke, the truth came out in fragments. Years. Secretly. Not hurting anyone. Didn't know how to explain. Didn't want anyone to know. Didn't want this to happen like this. I kept expecting the moment to turn ugly, but she didn't yell. She didn't mock me. She just looked at me with this strange mix of surprise and sadness, and then she said something that broke me open. You look more scared than guilty. I cried so hard after that sentence, I could barely breathe. Not because everything was solved. It wasn't. But because in one line she saw the difference between shame and fear. Wasn't ashamed of what I felt in those private moments. I was ashamed of being seen. There's a difference, and until then, even I hadn't understood it clearly. That conversation lasted hours. I answered questions I had never said out loud before. Not all of them elegantly. Some with confusion. Some with tears. Some with long pauses. She asked if this was a joke.
No.
A phase.
No.
A performance. Sometimes, maybe, but not only that. She asked if I wanted to be someone else. I told her I didn't fully know how to explain it in neat words, that sometimes it felt like expression, sometimes comfort, sometimes release, sometimes identity, sometimes all of that tangled together. The truth was messy, and for once I let it stay messy. I didn't force a polished answer, just to sound acceptable. And then came the moment that changed everything between us. She asked if I wanted help. I almost laughed because it sounded impossible. Help from a real person in my real life? But she meant it. Over the next few weeks, she became the first person to know me fully in this area of my life. She helped me sort clothes that didn't work. She taught me little things I had been fumbling through alone. That the right necklace can balance a whole look. That overdoing one feature can throw off everything else. That confidence looks better than discomfort every single time. That if shoes hurt so badly you can't walk naturally, no outfit is worth it. That posture changes more than people think. That gentleness with yourself matters, especially after bad nights. She didn't treat me like a secret project or a scandal. She treated me like a person. Having one ally can transform an entire inner world. I didn't realize how much energy I had spent hiding until I experienced what it felt like not to hide from at least one person. Even simple things became emotional. Choosing an outfit without panic. Laughing at a failed eyeliner wing instead of treating it like a moral collapse. Being able to ask, "Does this work?" without hearing only my own cruel thoughts in response. That period was healing, but it also made the next problem unavoidable. Once one person knows, the fantasy of total secrecy starts to crack. The real test came at a family function. There's always a family function, isn't there? The kind where everyone shows up, everyone watches everyone, and every small shift in your energy gets noticed. I was there physically, but mentally, I was exhausted. I had spent the previous night dressed, talking, learning, feeling alive, and now I was back in the role everyone expected from me. Something in me was tired of switching so violently. My cousin noticed. At one point, she pulled me aside and quietly asked, "How long are you going to keep splitting yourself in half?" I had no answer, because that was exactly what it felt like. Not balance. Not privacy. Splitting. That question stayed with me for days. Then weeks. I couldn't ignore it. I started realizing that my greatest pain was not even the hiding itself. It was the constant translation. Turning oneself off so the other could survive. Smiling in one voice when another voice wanted room to breathe. Wearing what was expected while remembering exactly what it felt like to be relieved, soft, open, expressive, whole. And once you become conscious of that split, it becomes much harder to pretend it's sustainable forever. Still, I wasn't ready for a grand reveal. Let me say that clearly because I know how these stories can sound after the fact. Growth does not always mean dramatic public confession. Sometimes growth is much quieter. Sometimes it means telling one more trusted person. Sometimes it means no longer insulting yourself after you change back. Sometimes it means buying what actually fits instead of what some fantasy says you should be. Sometimes it means stepping outside for 10 minutes instead of none. Sometimes it means taking your own feelings seriously after years of dismissing them. I wish more people understood that courage is often incremental. My next step was telling my closest friend, the one person in my life whose opinion mattered enough to terrify me. We had known each other for years. We'd laughed together, struggled together, shared the kind of everyday history that makes silence feel heavy. I almost told him 5 times before I actually did. Every time I imagined it, I heard all the worst possible responses. "Bro, what? Are you serious? Since when? That's weird. I don't get it." Or worse, a polite reaction followed by permanent distance. But keeping it from him started to feel dishonest in a way I couldn't defend anymore. When I finally told him, I did it in the messiest way possible. No dramatic setup, no perfect speech, just one shaky admission after another. I remember watching his face so closely, I probably looked guilty of a crime. He stayed quiet longer than I wanted, which felt unbearable. Then he exhaled and said, I'm not going to pretend I understand everything right away, but I'm still here. Those words mattered because they were real. Not overperformed, not fake, not instantly enlightened. Just real. He asked questions. Some thoughtful, some awkward, some funny without being cruel. And by the end of that conversation, I realized something profound. The people worth keeping in your life do not need you to be simpler. They need you to be honest. Telling him brought relief, but it also triggered a chain reaction inside me. Every acceptance made hiding from everyone else feel heavier. Not because I suddenly owed the world an explanation, but because I was learning what it felt like to not flinch in my own truth. Once you taste that, total concealment becomes harder to tolerate. At the same time, danger becomes more complicated. Because when you're no longer only afraid of losing secrecy, you also become afraid of losing progress. I started thinking, what if I've come this far just to be destroyed by one wrong reveal? That fear almost pushed me backward again. Then came the hardest blow of all, and it didn't arrive as hatred. It arrived as suspicion. Someone in my family noticed changes. Not the clothes directly. Not proof. Just changes. Softer gestures sometimes. More time alone. A certain care with appearance I hadn't shown before. Questions began circling casually, the way families often test truth before they ask for it openly. You've changed lately. Is everything okay? Why are you spending so much time in your room? Why do you seem distracted? Harmless questions on the surface, but I knew what lived beneath them. My anxiety returned full force. Old panic. Old scrubbing. Old overthinking. For a week I considered getting rid of everything. Every outfit. Every trace. Every version of me I had fought so hard to uncover. That week taught me one of the cruelest things about hidden identity. You can make years of emotional progress and still be thrown back into old fear by one shift in the atmosphere around you. Healing is not a straight line. It is a loop, a return, a spiral, a re-encounter with the same fear from a slightly stronger position. Back then, I didn't know I was stronger. I only knew I was scared again. But strength isn't the absence of old fear. It's the decision not to let old fear write the ending. The breaking point came late one night when I was sitting on the floor surrounded by clothes, trying to decide what to keep and what to destroy. I had one hand on a dress I loved and the other on a trash bag, and I suddenly heard myself say out loud, "Why am I treating the things that make me feel alive like evidence from a crime?" The room went silent. Even I was shocked by how honest that sounded, because that was exactly what I had been doing. Punishing joy, managing beauty like guilt, loving expression, and then handling it like contraband. Something in me refused that logic after that. So instead of throwing everything away, I made rules. Real rules. Safety rules. Emotional rules. Practical rules. I chose better storage. Better timing. Better boundaries. Better money habits. Better risk assessment. I stopped romanticizing recklessness. I stopped confusing chaos with courage. I told myself that if this side of me truly mattered, then I had to care for it intelligently, not just passionately. That shift changed everything. It turned cross-dressing from stolen desperation into intentional self-expression. And then, after all of that, after the near catches, the secret photos, the first outing, the accidental discovery, the trusted conversations, the suspicion, the almost purge, came the moment I can still feel in my chest when I think about it. The night they finally saw me. It wasn't supposed to happen. That's the truth. Anyone telling you they planned every major reveal in their life is probably rewriting the memory to make it cleaner than it was. Mine was chaos. I was dressed in my cousin's place, safer there than anywhere else, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing. We were talking, laughing, adjusting details, and I remember feeling unusually calm. Then we heard voices outside. More than one. family members. Unexpected. Too early. Wrong timing. Wrong universe. We looked at each other, and in that instant both understood there was no realistic way to erase me fast enough. Panic flooded the room, but something else came with it. A strange stillness. Maybe I was too exhausted to keep running. Maybe I had already crossed too many inner lines to survive another total erasure. Maybe I simply knew that if I destroyed myself in front of them before they even spoke, I would carry that humiliation longer than any judgment they could throw at me. So for the first time in my life, instead of tearing everything off, I stood there. The door opened. 3 faces. Shock immediately. Silence, heavy enough to bend the air. I can't tell you those first seconds felt brave. They felt unbearable. I saw questions explode behind their eyes. I saw every year of hiding catch up to me at once. My mouth went dry. My hands were cold. One part of me wanted to explain everything. Another wanted to disappear through the floor. Then one of them said my name, but not angrily.
Confused.
Hurt, maybe. Scared, maybe.
Human.
Very human. And because the moment was already broken beyond repair, I chose honesty over panic. I said, "This is me too." Not polished. Not complete. Not a thesis. Just the truth. Nobody clapped. Nobody. The night they finally saw the side I hid for years, I thought my world was about to end. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fix my lipstick. My heartbeat was so loud I was sure everyone outside my door could hear it. And for one impossible second I stood frozen in front of the mirror thinking, this is it. This is the moment everything breaks. But what actually broke that night was not my life. It was the fear that had been controlling me for years. And if you've ever hidden your clothes in the back of a drawer, if you've ever wiped makeup off your face because you heard footsteps in the hallway, if you've ever looked at yourself in the mirror and felt more real in that one secret moment than you do in your everyday life, then stay with me. Because this story is not just about getting caught. It's about what happens when the version of you that you kept buried finally steps into the light, and instead of destroying you, it teaches you how to live. For years, I told myself I was only curious. That was the safest word. Curious. Not serious. Not deep. Not important. Just curious. It sounded temporary, harmless, forgettable. The kind of thing a person could outgrow if they ignored it long enough. But curiosity doesn't make your chest tighten when you see a soft blouse hanging in a store window. Curiosity doesn't make you memorize makeup tutorials in secret while pretending you're just scrolling randomly. Curiosity doesn't make you transformed into a perfect ally in 30 seconds. Real life isn't that simple. There were difficult questions. There were long pauses. There were expressions that cut me more deeply than words would have. One person asked if this was a joke. Another asked how long. Another asked why I never said anything. That one almost made me laugh through tears. Why didn't I say anything? Because people don't confess the parts of themselves they think might cost them love. That's why. I expected anger, but what came first was confusion. Confusion can still hurt, but it's different from contempt. It means the story is not finished. So I answered. Not perfectly. Not with rehearsed clarity. With the shaky honesty of someone who had run out of energy for self-erasure. I told them it had been years. I told them I had tried to ignore it. I told them it wasn't about mocking anyone, hurting anyone, or performing for attention. I told them this side of me made me feel calm in a way my ordinary life often didn't. I told them I was tired of being terrified all the time. And somewhere in the middle of all that, my voice stopped shaking. That surprised me more than anything. Because I realized something while I was standing there being seen. Fear gets weaker the moment it loses secrecy as its main weapon. Once the worst moment is actually happening, once you are no longer waiting for the explosion but standing inside it, a different kind of power becomes possible. Not easy. Not comfortable. But possible. That night did not end in perfect acceptance. It ended in emotional wreckage, half answers, tired eyes, and a silence that stretched for days afterward. But hidden inside that silence was a miracle. I was still there. Still loved by some. Still uncertain with others. Still vulnerable. Still real. The world had not ended. My life had not evaporated. My fear had lied about the scale of destruction. Not completely, because consequences are real, but enough that I could finally see the exaggeration I had been ruled by for years. The days after exposure were harder than the reveal itself in some ways. Everyone wants to know what happens after the dramatic moment, and here is the honest answer. Aftermath is not cinematic. It is awkward breakfasts, avoided eye contact, random questions at the wrong time, too much thinking, too little language, people acting normal too quickly, people not acting normal quickly enough. I learned that revelation doesn't instantly create understanding. It creates a new stage where understanding might become possible if everyone is willing to sit in discomfort long enough. Some of the conversations were painful. There were questions that made me feel small. There were assumptions I had to untangle gently because anger would only make people stop listening. There were moments I had to say, I'm still figuring some of that out. And that was one of the biggest lessons of my life. You do not need a perfect label, a complete theory, or a final polished identity speech to deserve honesty. I'm still figuring it out is a truthful sentence, and truth is stronger than fake certainty. A few people surprised me in ways I'll never forget. Someone I expected to reject me completely became protective after the initial shock passed. Another person who always seemed open-minded became colder than I imagined. That taught me not to write everyone's reaction in advance. We create stories in our heads because uncertainty is terrifying, but people are often more complex than our predictions. Some need time. Some never grow. Some meet you halfway. Some leave. Some love you awkwardly at first and better later. Some accept one part of the story, but not all of it. Reality is messy, but messy reality is still better than living forever inside imagined catastrophe. One evening, maybe a couple of weeks after everything came out, I had a conversation with an older family member that changed the emotional temperature of my life. They sat with me quietly for a long time before speaking. Then they said, I don't understand this fully, but I can see you've been carrying it alone. That sentence shattered something hard inside me. Because beneath every argument about expression, identity, presentation, or gendered expectation, there was one simple human truth. I had been carrying it alone. And being seen in that loneliness mattered almost as much as being accepted in the expression itself. After that, I stopped treating my story like a courtroom defense. I stopped performing innocence. I stopped trying to make myself easier to digest by shrinking the emotional truth of what this meant to me. I began speaking more plainly. I enjoy this. It matters to me. It helps me feel whole. It is not a joke. It is not a random phase. I am not saying I have every answer, but I am saying this is real. There is immense power in simple truth when you say it without apology. Wait until the house is silent, until every door is closed, until every risk has fallen asleep, just so you can pull a hidden bag from under the bed and become yourself for 15 trembling minutes. What I had was never just curiosity. It was a part of me I kept trying to rename, because I was terrified of what it meant if I said it honestly. I still remember the first time I felt it. I was young, too young to understand categories, labels, or fear the way adults do. I only understood feeling. There was a family gathering at our house, and people were moving from room to room, laughing, eating, talking over one another, and somewhere in the middle of that noise I wandered into a bedroom where a dress had been laid neatly across the bed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even glamorous. Just a simple piece of clothing waiting to be worn. But I stared at it the way some people stare at a door they didn't know existed until they saw the handle. I didn't know why I couldn't stop looking. I only knew something in me had gone quiet, focused, awake. That moment passed. People came in. I walked out. Nothing happened. And yet everything had started. Years later, that feeling returned stronger, sharper, and much harder to ignore. It came in flashes at first. A texture, a color, a silhouette, a thought that stayed too long. I would tell myself not to think about it, and then think about it all day. I would say I was normal, as if normal was something you could force by repetition. I would. And here's the part one wish every hidden crossdresser could hear from someone who has lived both the secrecy and the exposure. You do not become more valid when other people approve of you. Their acceptance can change your safety, your peace, your opportunities, and your relationships, yes. All of that matters. But validity begins earlier, in private, the first time you admit to yourself that what you feel is real. I spent too many years waiting for external permission to decide whether my inner life counted. It counted long before anyone else knew. That doesn't mean every reveal is safe.
Please hear me clearly on that.
Safety matters. Environment matters. Your financial dependence matters. Your living situation matters. Your mental health matters. The fantasy online that every truth must be spoken immediately and publicly can be as dangerous as shame itself. Courage without strategy can break people. If you are still hidden, I am not telling you to rush. I am telling you not to confuse careful timing with personal failure. Some of the smartest choices I made were about where not to reveal, when not to go out, who not to trust, and which spaces were not earned by my honesty. You are allowed to protect yourself. Protection is not cowardice. But I will also say this: do not let protection turn into permanent self-burial. That happened to me for years. I told myself I was being practical, when really I was being erased one quiet compromise at a time. At some point you have to create room, however small, where your real self gets to breathe. Maybe it starts with a better outfit in a locked room. Maybe it starts with learning makeup properly instead of rushing in fear. Maybe it starts with taking photos for yourself. Maybe it starts with one trusted person. Maybe it starts with a nighttime walk. Maybe it starts with simply saying, "This matters to me," and refusing to mock yourself for it afterward. Small room first, big world later. The strangest thing about being seen was that after years of imagining the moment, the most powerful part wasn't their reaction. It was mine. I didn't collapse into self-hatred. I didn't beg to be forgiven for existing. I didn't pretend it was all a misunderstanding. I stayed standing. That image of myself has never left me. Not because I looked perfect. Honestly, I was a nervous mess. But because I finally witnessed my own refusal to disappear. That was the real transformation. Not the outfit. Not the makeup. Not the reveal. The refusal. Over time, things settled. Not into some impossible ideal, but into reality. I became less split. More integrated. There were still boundaries. Still selective openness. Still people I chose not to discuss it with deeply. But the crushing loneliness was gone. And once loneliness lifted, my relationship to cross-dressing changed again. It became more joyful and less haunted. I could focus on style, comfort, elegance, experimentation, and expression instead of treating every session like a high-risk emotional emergency. I got better too. Way better. Better at dressing for my shape instead of trying to force fantasy. Better at choosing outfits that felt authentic rather than costumes that looked impressive for 30 seconds. Better at makeup that worked with my features instead of fighting them. Better at knowing when less was more. Better at posture, pacing, mood, and the tiny details that make you feel like yourself instead of a disguise. But the biggest improvement wasn't visual. It was internal. I stopped chasing the impossible goal of looking flawless enough to deserve peace. Peace came first. Skill followed. If you're listening to this and wondering whether your own hidden side is real enough, serious enough, worthy enough, let me save you some years of pain. If it keeps returning with honesty, it is real. If you feel more alive in those moments than in the role you perform automatically every day, pay attention. If your heart quiets when you see yourself the right way, pay attention. If the thought of never expressing it again feels less like discipline and more like grief, definitely pay attention. You do not need to dramatize it to honor it. You only need to stop lying to yourself about how much it matters. I also want to talk about the trap of perfection, because it steals joy from so many of us. There was a time when I believed I had to reach some impossible standard before I could claim any of this honestly. Better body, better face, better wardrobe, better passability, better everything. But perfection is a delay tactic fear uses when it starts losing control. It tells you to wait until you are uncriticizable, which of course never happens. The truth is your journey becomes real the moment you engage it sincerely. Growth is beautiful specifically because it is visible. Your early awkwardness is not evidence against you. It is evidence that you had the courage to begin. And yes, there were losses too. I won't lie for the sake of inspiration. Some relationships changed permanently. Some people became careful around me in a way that made warmth feel thinner. Some spaces never felt fully comfortable again. But hiding had its own losses, and people rarely count those because they are invisible. The years I spent afraid. The photos I deleted. The nights I cut short. The softness I denied myself. The self-respect I postponed. Those were losses too. We have to compare honestly. Not exposed life versus perfect life. Exposed life versus hidden life. Messy truth versus lonely secrecy. Only then can you judge what the cost really is. One of the most emotional moments came much later, on an ordinary day, when I caught my reflection without the old panic attached to it. I was dressed, fully myself, moving through a space where at least some people already knew, and I looked up for a second expecting the old rush of fear. It wasn't there, or not in the same way. In its place was something I had wanted for years, but never named properly. Ease. Not performance. Not adrenaline. Ease. The ability to exist without immediately preparing to erase myself. That feeling is worth more than all the panic glamour fantasies in the world. Sometimes people ask whether I regret being seen. The honest answer is complicated. I regret the fear that made the reveal happen accidentally instead of on my own terms. I regret the years of silence that left me so unprepared for being known. I regret the lonely version of me who thought self-erasure was maturity. But do I regret the truth becoming visible? No. Because the side I hid for years was not ruining my life. The hiding was. And if I could go back and speak to the version of me trembling in locked rooms, scrubbing lipstick off in panic, deleting photos, whispering promises to quit that I never meant, I would not tell that person to be bolder immediately. I would tell them to be kinder first. Kinder with their body, kinder with their confusion, kinder with their pace, kinder with their mistakes. I would tell them that self-cruelty is not discipline. I would tell them that no beautiful transformation can grow in soil watered only by shame. I would tell them to buy fewer things and learn more, to stop chasing perfection, to breathe, to trust one safe person sooner, to understand that expression is not a moral failure. To believe that one day they would be seen and survive. That is the part one want to leave with you most deeply. Survive. Not because survival is the final goal, but because fear often speaks as if survival won't even be possible. It says one reveal, one mistake, one photo, one glance, one truth, and everything is over. Sometimes consequences are real, yes. Sometimes danger is serious, yes. But fear loves absolute language. It loves to tell you that one moment of honesty will end your entire story. In my case, the opposite happened. That moment began my real story. So when I say they finally saw the side I hid for years, I'm not just talking about the people in that room. I'm talking about me too. I finally saw that this part of me was not weak, pathetic, ridiculous, or disposable. She was patient. She waited through years of denial, panic, mistakes, and half-lived nights. She endured being hidden without disappearing. She kept returning because she was true. And when the door finally opened and there was nowhere left to run, she did not ask me to be perfect. She only asked me not to abandon her again. I didn't. And that changed everything. Now when I dress, I still remember the old fear sometimes. I remember the rushed beginnings, the near catches, the lonely trial and error, the trembling first steps outside, the stunned silence of being discovered, the painful conversations, the beautiful surprises, the slow rebuilding. I remember all of it, but memory no longer feels like a cage. It feels like proof. Proof that hidden things can survive long enough to become visible. Proof that softness can outlive fear. Proof that truth, even when delayed, still arrives with power. So if you're out there watching this with your own secret folded away somewhere, if you're wondering whether anyone could understand the strange mix of fear, excitement, shame, comfort, beauty, and relief that lives inside this journey, I do. I know what it is to feel more yourself in a forbidden moment than in a whole week of ordinary life. I know what it is to think one reveal will destroy you. I know what it is to stand there anyway. And I know what it is to realize, after all the years of hiding, that the side you were protecting from the world was also the side that had been trying to save you. They finally saw the side I hid for years. But the real miracle is that I finally stopped hiding it from myself. If you want, I can now make this even stronger by giving you a second version with an even more viral opening first 45 seconds, more emotional spikes, and higher attention pacing while still keeping it plain script and around the same length.